Hi, you've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Monday, September 2nd, and here in the Atlantic, still watching a very broad Invest 97L here, still sitting in the Lesser Antilles, and this really hasn't moved much since yesterday. And the reason for that is because pressures keep trying to lower in here due to trade winds piling up, and we have more stuff coming in from behind. We have an area of low pressure back here coming out of the intertropical convergence zone towards 97L, and you can see a mid-level feature developing over here. So all of this is acting to keep low pressures regenerating back here, and so the thing really hasn't been able to get over into the Caribbean during the last day or so. So the result is more rain here, and it's moving a little bit slower than expected, and will take a couple of days to actually clear out of here. So lots of rain coming for this area. If we look close in on this here, we can see that it's still quite broad in here, very elongated swath of spinning air in here. And you can see there's actually the low pressure center, the main one, is right here north of Barbados. And Barbados pressure got down to 1,008 millibars this afternoon, and you can see some convection going off with it here. The convection has been on and off as one might expect with a system this broad, but you can see the trade winds coming out of the northeast here in the northwestern quadrant of the system. Notice how they just continue on this way all the way off the screen here. They're not really wrapping around the western side of the circulation, and so this is illustrative of how elongated this vorticity is and how this really lacks the consolidation necessary to become a tropical depression. And of course we have this stuff coming in from behind, and that's going to be interesting to see how that interacts with this. And the NHC today lowered their development chances over the next 2 days, but kept the chances over the next 5 days the same, citing mid-level dry air in this region as the problem for its organization. And it's a little strange that they say that, given that 700 millibar relative humidity on the soundings this morning was 75% in Barbados, 66% in Guadeloupe, and it is a little bit drier up at 500 millibars. But this really isn't the big problem for this system. It's just its sheer size here, filling your entire screen, that is making development difficult right now and making convection relatively sporadic. But we are seeing this still in a fairly favorable environment aloft, with a nice outflow coming out of the top here and some coming out of the bottom. A little bit weaker today due to the convection letting up. But in general, with this upper level low backing away to the west, this will be in a decent environment to try to organize. And as it comes slowly westward, we'll see what this can do. Again, the Central Caribbean, it will be difficult for it to do much given the strong trade winds here. And we'll see if it can get going. It will probably wait until it gets much farther west up here and try not, if it can avoid the islands, might try to organize. But here's the model tracks today. And we've seen a significant shift to the north since yesterday. Yesterday, a lot of model tracks had it down here. Now we see a lot of models taking it over or actually north of Hispaniola, some missing it entirely. And I'm really suspect of some of these runs here way off to the northeast. A lot of these are GFS-based runs, and a lot of these are the hurricane models like the HWRF and GFDL, which feed back the storm into a Cat 3, which is not going to happen, and take it too far north. And then the GFS, here's what it's doing. This is 4 to 8 hours looking at the 850 millibar wind. You can see the core of the system just about here south of Puerto Rico. Notice this to the east, and this is a tiny little wavelet, and really nothing here to the east, but the GFS decides to feed this back into its own entity here northeast of Puerto Rico. Here's where the original system goes, into Hispaniola, and then by 108 hours you see what it does, and it actually tries to consolidate the system up towards this secondary low way off to the north. And I think this may be another one of the GFS's feedback issues, where it takes something minuscule on the northern side of a wave axis and develops it for no reason. And we'll see if this is indeed the case. It did that with 92L back here in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of weeks ago, and the GFS ended up being wrong there. So if it's wrong again about this, I have doubts about this really far to the north track here. I think a track more either into Hispaniola or just south of it and into the Greater Antilles region in general is more likely over the next couple of days. But what's happened now is it's a little bit of a shift to the north as expected, because it's been sitting here a little bit longer than expected. So now this low-level ridge here is going to have time to break down as a trough and a front drop down off of North Carolina in a couple of days, and that will allow it to gain some more latitude, perhaps getting more involved with Hispaniola than I expected yesterday. now that it's sitting for a lot longer time. But here's the European now, and this is out to day 5. And remember yesterday what we had was a piece down here. It split it into two. We had a piece there and we had a piece up here, so it split it into two separate entities. Today we have something more consolidated in between, which I talked about yesterday seemed a little bit more likely to me, and I like this look from the European now a lot better. That is keeping it together. You can see it's still elongating the vorticity, but you can see in general the system a little bit more in one piece here, moving into the vicinity centered around Cuba in 5 days. And I think this is the most likely outcome for the system. And of course, the European doesn't actually develop it into a tropical cyclone, but anything can happen here in and around the islands. Land interaction may keep it down if it actually gets involved with the mountains here. But if it happens to consolidate on either side of Cuba here, then we may have a chance for this to develop in a few days. It'll struggle in here most likely, but once it gets in here, if it can avoid land enough, we may see it try to develop in this region. And this is the UK Met low-level wind field by day 3, showing kind of the same thing. You can see the wave axis here, the focus of the system moving into the mountains of Hispaniola, and generally moving it off towards the west-northwest. By day 5, it has it in here. So with the UK Met and the European agreeing much better with each other today, I like the idea that this comes generally west-northwest and probably gets involved with the Greater Antilles here. And we'll see what happens with it. But the main concern for this system right now is going to be the heavy rains that it could potentially bring to these mountainous areas. We're getting a lot of rains in the Lesser Antilles, but of course Hispaniola is a whole nother story. Whenever they get heavy rains from these waves, it can be disastrous. So that is currently the main hazard with this system, and this is the general idea. I've spent the last couple of days outlining why this is a system to watch, and now that we are watching it, I think we have a medium chance for this to try to develop at some point over the next week, and I still like the idea that it gets into this area centered around Cuba in 4 to 6 days. It's been moving slower than expected during the last 24 hours, and we'll see when it finally starts to move westward here. Should be soon, and we'll see if it can consolidate. But again, the Central Caribbean is generally unfavorable for development, and then the Greater Antilles are in the way. So there are obstacles in the way of this to develop, but if it can get on its own and concentrated over an open water area, then the pattern favors this trying to go. So we'll have to keep a close eye on this, as it will be with us for the next several days. If not more than a week from now, we might still be watching it. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.